please join me in welcoming California's 34th and 39th Governor, Jerry Brown.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thanks. All right. Thank you for that very warm welcome. Very appropriate, given global warming. We need warm and exciting attitudes to get anything done. So I'm very glad to be here. I think this is a very important effort from the private sector, the nonprofit sector, to mobilize the kind of understanding and political will that it takes to make the transformation that has not yet been made. We've got a long way to go here. And I'm going to talk to you basically about what I know. And what I know is what I've been doing for many years. Even way back when in 1975, when I first became governor, one of the first things to do was to appoint an Air Resources Board chairperson. And that person worked in my campaign, a friend of mine, Tom Quinn. And then after a couple of years, he appointed Mary Nichols. And Mary Nichols is still the chair of the California Air Resources Board, with some intermission in between. I only say that because there's a lot of understanding that comes from people who've been working at this problem. And our first year there, the Air Resources Board decided to reduce the sulfur emissions significantly that come from automobiles. And Henry Ford II, Jr., whatever it was, he came out here. He was a big player at that time. He was CEO of Ford. He said, you can't do that. We're not going to be able to sell Fords. This is too expensive. This is terrible. We did it anyway. So I mention that because way back when, in 1975, there was still this conflict between an idea, namely that there was technology that could reduce sulfur emissions that were damaging to health and to plants, to the environment, and we could adopt it by a rule of the California Air Resources Board, and a rule that would have the coercive impact of a law that even the Ford Motor Company, at its peak of power, couldn't stop. So that's kind of a model of where we got to go. And fast forward, we did a lot of things over the years. And this kind of effort, and I'm really talking about what I learned through the instrumentality of government. There's a lot of other things going on. There's businesses, there's universities, there's nonprofit, there's activist groups. There's, the whole world is faced with this global challenge. And so there are many elements. But one critical element has to be the collective effort embodied in government initiative. And government initiative works by a law, which is backed up by force. Ultimately, that's the way it works. By a regulation, backed up by force, by taxing, taking money away from people based on certain activities, or spending money, investing in research, subsidizing, encouraging, like we do in tax credits for solar installations, for purchasing electric vehicles, and what have you. So maybe this sounds kind of elementary, but I like to come kind of out of the sky of things. Now, I was known as Governor Moonbeam, so I love to be up in the clouds and keep my eyes on the stars, but we're supposed to be grounded. And when you get grounded, you want to know what is the machinery of making emissions, carbon emissions, go down. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about. And putting this in context, I want to just say from the outset, I don't think, if I just made a general statement, that the world is awake yet about what we're talking about. I was at a meeting, economic forum in Vladivostok, Russia, about 2 years ago. And we had the president of South Korea, Mongolia, and the prime minister of Japan, Mr. Abe, and Mr. Putin. They were all there on the stage, and they were talking about LNG terminals, pipelines, port facilities, a lot of impressive infrastructure investments. And in an entire conversation by four of those great world leaders, not a word about climate change, even though everything they were talking about generates significant carbon emissions. So I'm sure things are a little bit better now, or I hope they would be, but we've got a long way to go. And in the corridors of power, global warming is not one of the basic, it's not what grabs people, most people. The issues, maybe if you're a Republican, the thing you hate most is the tax. So if someone wants to talk taxes, your blood starts boiling. We got no tax. Okay, that's that issue. Other people are interested in schools and education, and some people are interested in roads. A lot of people are interested in crime and being safe. So there's all these issues. But when you take this global warming, that is so all-encompassing that I would venture to say everybody in this room is very concerned, and you're here. But if you walk a little ways or go a little way toward city halls, boards of supervisors, state capitol, I can tell you, I'm not giving you an opinion. I am reporting empirical facts because I've been in the caucus of the Democratic caucus in the state assembly, state senate, same in the Republican caucus. And yeah, one or two people will say something, but it isn't at the level of the threat. It isn't at the level of the task. Now, having said that's where I think California, we're in the forefront. There is no state doing more to deal with climate change than California. We are way ahead of every other state and all the other countries in the Western Hemisphere, and not all, but most of the countries of the world. But having said that, we are at the beginning of a trek up a Mount Everest of difficulty and challenge. We have such a long way to go. It truly requires a transformation. And the transformation is not just a technical fix, although it is definitely totally very dependent on technology and innovation and research and development. Yes, and analysis, careful, analytical efforts and cost benefits of this and that. But on top of all that, there has to be an attitudinal shift. A few decades ago, there was a term, paradigm shift. There's a lot of talk about paradigm shift. In fact, I even used that phrase myself. But I don't know what paradigm shifted. At least they didn't shift in the right direction, as far as I'm concerned. So, but that is a word that points to the magnitude of what's in front of us. And what's different is that a molecule of CO2 that's emitted here or emitted in the middle of Africa or in the Arctic, it all adds, it all gets into the atmosphere. So we're all contributing, and then the global effects through climate disruption and temperature rise, we're all affected by that. So this is probably the first time in human history that all the people are implicated in this great problem and are required to respond. So that makes it quite unusual. But if you look at the debates, you pick up the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're covering it more. I remember a few years ago that I had to have a press conference. In fact, we had a group of scientists that developed a whole manifesto and report on the current state of knowledge regarding carbon emissions. And we had a report down at the Ames Center there down the peninsula where NASA has an office. So we had this bunch of scientists standing around me. I thought I needed a lot of credibility. So these are serious scientists. We had a few reporters. We finished the program, and they started, well, what about this? You know, the news of the day. And so they didn't even talk about it. So the next time I had a press conference on the climate change, I looked at the reporters and say, you can't report this. I was trying to challenge them. After a few years, they started reporting. But it wasn't very long ago that climate change wasn't even in, you couldn't see it, couldn't hear it. Well, now people are talking about it. So we're making progress. We've got a long way to go. We have to, and it's going to take almost, when I say transformative effort, it takes almost prophetic effort. And when I think of prophetic effort, I think of different tradition, Zen practice, which I did in Japan for 6 months. And 3 elements they talked about if you were going to move down the path of some enlightenment. One is great doubt. You have to have great doubt. And you need great faith. And you need great commitment. And as I think about what we need to do in respect to climate change, you need doubt so you're looking skeptically and with fresh eyes on what's going on. I mean, is it really the way we think it is? Doubt creates tension. And then in the face of insufficient evidence, you still have to have the courage and the faith to proceed, to take action. Because by the time we know everything, it'll be too late. So we have to act on what we know today, and it isn't all the evidence that some people require. And the third, of course, is commitment. There has to actually be an embodied effort and action. Now, I want to just run by quickly what California has done, because I think it's illustrative of what has to be done everywhere. And what it is what has to be, we have to do even more of it. First, our vehicles. We have over 30 million vehicles a year traveling, I think it's 450, yeah, it's, a few hundred million here, 450 billion miles a year. It's huge. And we're using 18 billion gallons of gasoline and diesel, 18 billion total fossil fuel. So we got to cut that down. And it's not going down, by the way, it's going up. We have 450,000 electric cars, more than any place else, getting more electric buses. And the technology is there. We can see it. And the price of batteries coming down. But you need government policies. You got to subsidize. You got to have chargers. You have to put preferential parking, HOV lanes. A lot of things to do. California is down that road more than anybody, but we got to crank up. We need at least 5 million electric cars by 2030. That's our goal. And, we're taking some steps, and we need research, technology, but we also need a lot of government policies to make it happen. Second thing, we need efficiency. California led the way in building efficiency standards and also appliance standards. Now, we did that during my first term as governor to require appliances, refrigerators, stoves, washing machines to reach a certain efficiency standard. Then, Ronald Reagan, when he was president, he issued a federal preemptive standard that displaced the California standard. And you know what the standard was? It was no standard. So the federal government imposed a no standard and displaced ours. Ultimately, over time, we were allowed to have our standard. But tight appliance standards and building standards, efficiency. May sound mundane, but it's tremendously complicated. It's expensive, and the laws on buildings, the rules were simple, pretty small, very thin, the building code. Now you look at the building code, it's gigantic, many volumes, and that's part of the complexity. This is not just talk, rhetoric, simple. You really got to know, and to know you have to have rules, you have to do research, you have to have expert knowledge, and that's what we're doing. So those are the two things. Then on top of that, that's two things. Third thing, California has a low carbon fuel standard. That standard says that by 2030, you have to have 10% of your fossil fuel, not fossil fuel. It has to be zero, and that's what we call a low carbon fuel standard. Nobody else in the country has, well, Oregon has a minor version of it. Washington tried to do it, the oil companies killed it. They want to kill it in California. The reason why they want to kill it, the low carbon fuel standard, which I won't explain to you, but everybody knows it's a clearly technically defined idea, that costs about $110 a ton for carbon emissions. So when you emit a certain amount of carbon, you got to pay $100 a ton. That's big, and that's why the oil companies don't like it. And by the way, you pay it not to the government, but you have to buy credits from your competitors. People who make electric cars, people who make biodiesel, or whatever. So it's a transfer of money from the fossil fuel industry to the emerging biofuel, low or no carbon industry. Really important, powerful. Anytime you try to do it, the oil company's going to crush it. So we need not just government, we need popular support that will enable government to do the right thing. We also have a cap and trade system. That's again controversial, both on the left and the right, but that imposes a cost of about $13 a ton, and that money goes into the state government. We've already collected about $8 billion, and that money goes into helping people buy electric cars, building housing near transit stops, investing in in agriculture, biodigesters, healthy soils, healthy forests, a whole raft of ecological, climate-saving investments come from that money. And so that's the cap and trade. And that was recently renewed, and some people don't like it, but it's about 20% of the California strategy to get to zero carbon. We want to get to, our goal is to get there by 2045. And not easy to get there, by the way. One way we could help is if we reduce the pollutants like methane, chlorofluorocarbons, and soot, or black carbon. Those super pollutants, they generate 50, 100 times more CO2, more greenhouse gases than the normal than CO2 does, the greenhouse gas equivalents. So you bring them down, and you get a few more years to get to zero carbon. By the way, when you think of zero carbon, if you read the oil company reports, British Petroleum, Exxon, they're predicting well over 100 billion. They're predicting, no, it's somewhere at 94 million barrels of oil consumed a day, which is about what we're doing today. So from the oil company perspective, and also the IEA, the International Energy Administration, it's about the same thing. No matter what we do, they're predicting that in 2040, we'll be selling about the same amount of oil and gas that we're doing today. So we got to make that not happen. Then we have the portfolio standard for electricity. In California, we're now about 33% electric. We'll get to that 100%. We'll get there, and we'll get to 60% by 2030. That's a big leap. And back just a few years ago, utility executives, PG&E, Southern California Edison, said, we cannot get to 20% renewable by 2020. Well, they're way beyond that now. So technology often can help us out. And then finally, we have something called the Under 2 Coalition, keeping the climate under 2. And we have signed up state of California, the province of Baden-Württemberg, and many provinces in China and South America, over 200 states and provinces representing well over 1 billion people are committed to meeting the Paris goals. So that's what we've done. So there are things we can do. We're doing them. Most of the other states are not doing it. Some don't want to, some do, but you need the institutional knowledge, you need the capacity, you need the regulations, the laws, the political will, but you also have to have the support from people, and it's got to be generated. That's why meetings such as this, if you, somehow through writing, through organizing, we've got to wake people up, because this thing is coming. And some estimates that I've seen say we're going to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the beginning of the industrial age by 2030. That's a big jump. And the climate disruption and the fires, this is going to be a big deal. It's a big deal about wine and agricultural productivity. That's just the fires. And then the smoke and what all that does. We need healthy soils, healthy forests. We have to have different practices in how we treat the land, the soil. And we can do all that. And it costs lots of money. We're talking globally trillions. And, you know, we just did this tax break. It was $1 trillion over 10 years. Well, we got to do that many times, but in an intelligently focused, integrated way in America. And then we got to do it in Europe, then China, and China, by the way, is doing more than we're doing, more than this country. And then we got to do it in India, which isn't doing as much as it should. So all I'm saying is it's doable. The consequences are unthinkable. Just one, if we make unlivable many of these areas like Central America, Mexico, Africa, you're going to see migration 100 times what it was after the Syrian war, and you see how that's destabilized Europe. So before, you know, everything goes to hell, physically, politically, we're going to have democracy totally disrupted and destroyed. So we should be motivated, and we know we have the capacity, the technology, the innovation. We got to put the money. We got to create the political will, and that's up to you. No one person can do this. No one state, no one country. It's all the people in all of the world doing what we have to do for the first time in human history, that humanity has a unifying challenge and a unifying theme. Thank you.